Good morning to Manju and friends from across the world. Thank you for joining us for another series of the webinars titled Imaginaries for a Resilient and Inclusive New World. This has been a web talk series basically to imagine new pathways for humanity in a post-COVID world. So we have come to week 11, and the topic for today has been titled 2020, an existential hindsight for a better tomorrow. And our speaker for today is Dr. Manju Reddy. I will introduce her in a couple of minutes. But moving on to what she's going to talk to us today, she's going to be looking at, India is like, it's about a 70 odd year old country. And from what the early nation builders dreamt of as soon as they got freedom from the British colonial rule, uh, where we have moved from that amazingly rich past, and what is it that is blindfolding all of us today. And the pandemic has definitely exposed a whole lot of things. It has opened up many areas which we had otherwise forgotten and not really spent time to look at where exactly these hotspots of the problems were. And with the pandemic and the lockdown, the lives and livelihoods of everybody has come to some kind of a grinding halt. Life is definitely not the same, and it's not going to be business as usual. We're all getting used to a new norm. And in that background, where is our mental health? What kind of experiences we are facing? And how did it all come about? What was the contribution of the economic policy since the 1990s? Are there things that we can learn from other countries such as Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan? So these are some of the areas Manju will touch upon. And she's also going to explore the many possibilities to understand the existential crisis of how we can imagine a better world, a new world, with all the utopic ideas that we can all dream of. So to introduce Dr. Manju Reddy to all of us today, she's a 2020 Leadership Institute for Women in Psychology Fellow, one among the 24 nationally selected to the American Psychological Association. And as a fellow, she's been exploring paths for in effective leadership and women's role in particular in promoting positive changes in institutional and organizational settings. She was trained in neurosciences, and she's been working in academic clinical settings. Over the last few years, she's been focusing on improving learning in K-10 school years, addressing factors particularly with respect to the early cognitive development and the unique outcomes facing underserved children. She addresses these topics through the organization she has set up. She's the founding member of the Arodham International, a social enterprise and a nonprofit, which is based in Los Angeles, but has programs both in India and the US. And she uses an upstream approach, and the Arodham programs implement language and STEM learning tools and wellness care towards school preparedness in rural schools for children from rural and low-income communities. So over to Manju, but before I hand over the forum to Manju, some housekeeping rules of Zoom. So request everybody to keep your phones on silent and your microphones on mute. And if you have questions, comments, please type it in the chat box. It becomes easy for all of us. And we are also on Facebook. So those of you who can't tune into Zoom can follow us on Facebook. And I think even the Twitter handles are going to be active. So you can follow us on Twitter as well. Thank you everyone for joining us for the 11th session. So over to Manju. Manju has a presentation and I will screen it, share my screen. So while Manju starts, over to you, Manju. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhargavi. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, yeah.
Good evening to you all and good day to rest if you're not in India. Thank you for this kind introduction. It is a blessed opportunity for me. Bhargavi and Leo, what inspires me is your love, your courage, and your doggedness. I was going to say tenacity, but tenacity doesn't really cover the way you bring your work, every day. And it's really the doggedness that inspires me, the love and courage in your work. Thank you again. Given it's Friday evening, and I come here in front of you with a few handicaps. My talk will never match happy hour. I think most people have happy hours, and I know we are in the COVID world now, but I'm not even going to try match myself to a beautifully imagined, a wonderful pubs that Bangalore has, or even a drink. But I'm hoping my musings will, I'll be able to share a perspective that we can all have a little more of. That's love, respect, and compassion. And my goal with these 21 slides is to offer a perspective that's hopefully will be emotive, creative, and inclusive in the way you think about work post-COVID-19. And also as you are in this reflective, contemplative mode, hopefully I will be able to, some of the slides that I share hopefully will infuse some new ideas and perspectives. Bhargavi, can we go to the first slide?
Yeah.
Or should I do it?
Yeah, you can start talking. I will bring it up. There's some challenge with my computer. I will do it.
Okay. Okay, so the first one was, there was a disclaimer slide that I had. Can we bring that up?
Manju, I would request you to start speaking. Yeah, I will be able to do it in a second. I should get it. Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to, the disclaimer has my email address and our website, and we can move on to the first slide. And so the title, 2020, an existential hindsight and a better look forward. I was really thinking about, what would be a befitting title. And also when Bhargavi and Leo asked me to give this talk, I was thinking, what can I bring to their forum? Then on a second thought, I was, I realized that, there's so much that we can learn from understanding human behavior, which has got a Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, can you see that now?
Yeah, I can see that. So what can, my background in neuroscience is understanding how brain works, and also how how we understand behavior from the neurological perspective. I realized that, there's so much we can understand, and this pandemic, COVID-19, has really opened up many, many portals, many, many avenues for us to think differently and to think new. And I would say it is just the thing that we needed at this point, for us to uh, reflect and pivot ourselves in a very different way than we have been doing things. That, I would say, globally, but India in particular, I think this is, I would say it is a blessing in disguise. As I said earlier when I shared my thoughts with you, India is India is still very, very young. And there are going to be these stresses, these existential crises that are going to come up again and again. India is just now, with being 73 years old after independence, has really taken off from being a toddler to an adolescent, I would say, or even just the early adolescence. So that's where India is, and there are many ways to look back, understand from that, and reimagine and rebuild in a different way than past. Bhargavi, shall I go to the next slide, or can you move to the next slide? I was trying to understand, I was trying to find a way to picture India and India's place in its larger world. The last 30 to 40 years, what we have seen is, amazing technological progress with the economic liberalization. And the blindfold that I have here is very colorful. And that's how, the last 30 years have been, since 1990. It's, it looks great from here, great from far. It's bright, it's attractive, but it in a way, if you look at, if you start thinking, reflecting for the past few months since March, you will see it was a blindfold. The next one, please, Bhargavi. And the best way to really think about this COVID-19 and India is this existential crises that that happened in India at many levels, and we're going to explore this in other slides as we move along. Is there going to be a dystopian future or utopian future? And one could sit and twiddle thumbs, or as you see it in this cartoon, keep thinking about this, or we can really reimagine, reshape our thinking to understand that all existential crisis is pre-verbal. I'm going to say that again. All existential crisis is pre-verbal. There were many, many signs, both good, bad, and ugly, that were playing out. And not much attention was given to certain domains or certain sectors, but then extreme focus was put on certain other sectors. And that is something which took about a good 30 to 40 years in the making. Next slide, please, Bhargavi. Yeah. And what was life before COVID-19, before the blindfolds came on? So starting, the early 50s, late 50s and 60s, there was a huge campaign that happened in public health care, and that was towards vaccination. Vaccinate children on the 6 vaccinations that WHO recommends. And this was going on, and this was actually a particularly successful feat that happened. But there were other diseases that were brewing and that began to just kind of grow wild. One of them is tuberculosis. And tuberculosis was a huge, since 1970s onwards, it was a huge, humongous problem that began to spread across India. And the public health campaigns really didn't match the lethality that tuberculosis brought. And since 1990, and particularly since 2000, what we have seen is the chronic diseases and the increased burden of disease from these chronic diseases. And these chronic diseases are cardiovascular disease, particularly diabetes, hypertension, and now cancers. And they have been increasing, and the prevalence has reached a place where both private hospitals and public hospitals just cannot contain anymore. India's number, India's population is too large. Even when WHO estimated in 2010 that for the next 40 years, India is going to have 40% of its adult population with diabetes or pre-diabetic state. Just imagine that number, just sheer number of that, and having to have clinics, whether it's in private or in public, to handle that mass population of folks with diabetes and associated conditions, and it just cannot handle. And you look at technology that was taking off like a rocket since 1990. Did any of those technological advances, did they ever look at what can be done in the field of medicine or in the field of public health? And we will see that there was very little done at that point. And I bring up education here, K through 10 education, which is crucial in public health approach and public health campaigns and education. So K through 10 education is another one that really, other than Right to Education Act of 2009, very little substance has really gone into education. Yes, there have been wonderful new schools, technology has been brought into schools, but there really are band-aid solutions to some of the huge looming problems in education. So before COVID-19, we already had a tuberculosis, which was an epidemic in India, and both infectious communicable diseases, especially antibiotic resistant, and there were antibiotic resistant, and also viral and bacterial infections were really on the rise, and they were not addressed, through using a public health approach. So next slide, Bhargavi. Yeah. So with that background, what we just saw in the previous slide, what did the crisis, this pandemic, COVID-19, what did it show to us? And here we look at the crises, and I call it crises, there was an interplay at so many levels, and mainly economic, social, emotional, psychological, and intellectual. And there was an interplay of all these in different communities, in the villages. It played out, it was on a continuum where some of the communities fared better than the others. So it really played out. A lot of these different levels, came into play, and this blindfold that we had on, we had not been looking at all of these factors before COVID-19 to an extent that India was capable of looking at. And I will talk about the capabilities and the strengths of India in a few slides down the road. Bhargavi, the next one, please. The best way to understand India's situation, where India was and where India is in COVID-19, I really like to draw upon Professor E.O. Wilson, who's an American biologist, naturalist, and a writer, and he's the world's leading expert on ants. And I particularly wanted to bring E.O. Wilson's work into this. Our lives, whether it's the population of India or the world population, with almost close to 7.2 billion people, our lives are very similar to ants in the way that we have to work together. And his work has has put a spotlight on how to understand cooperative behavior by looking at ants. And here is a quote that stuck with me. I read this quote, I think, he said this around 2007 in one of the I think it was at UNC Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And this has been kind of sitting in my head, and it's been bothering me for quite some time as I put on my professional hat and look at how things happen and how it has played out in my work, working with schools, working with teachers, and during my travels to villages in India. And here, E.O. Wilson says, this is the time we either will settle down as species or completely wreck the planet. We will have to evolve a better world than the one we have now, which I like to call our Star Wars civilization. And I particularly love the Star Wars civilization metaphor. I mean, we have Stone Age emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Boy, oh boy, talk about godlike technology. If we look at how India leapfrogged from, it was very difficult, both logistically and also what services could be provided by the government, both within the private and the public sector, the telephone lines. We leapfrogged into cell phones, and every person in India, no matter what their economic levels are or their social levels are, everybody knows what a cell phone is. Everybody knows what a WhatsApp is, and many other features that are on the phone. They know how to text. So we really leapfrogged into experiencing this godlike technology. And sadly, on the flip side of that, or on the other side, what we didn't see is that move away from the medieval institutions. And here, it's not the physical structure of the institutions. It's in these institutions, the institutional knowledge and the institutional wisdom that some of the earlier, nation builders, it began with the 5-year plans that was very popular and also did achieve quite a bit it made a significant progress, especially in the 60s and the 70s. And somehow a conversation that should have been elevated from those 5-year plans in 1990, 2000, and 2010 really didn't keep up with it. And one could argue the merit and demerits of the 5-year plans, but there was a plan in place, and that plan was not perfect. Nothing when we begin with an idea or an institution, nothing is perfect. Everything goes through the infancy, everything goes through adolescence, and then it grows up to be a strong adult. And we had institutional knowledge that we had from the 5-year plans, and we need to look at some of those. And there are some really good ideas and solutions that came out of it. And those didn't really keep up in the 1990s and 2000. And what did we see in terms of how it played out on the national and the international scale is that India could not keep up with the UN developmental goals of 2000, 2010 goals, 2020 goals, and now we are going to be soon approaching the 2030, the sustainability goals, and we are not prepared yet. And when we look at what made this medieval institutions remain medieval is the Stone Age emotions. And I want all of us to focus on these Stone Age emotions. And going forward, everything about us, all our emotions are the ones that are going to stir us. And being an emotive person, being able to harness our emotions to put ourselves in a better place to understand the post-COVID-19 world is going to be in front and center of our lives, and also our children and grandchildren's lives. Next slide, Bhargavi. So keep that, E.O. Wilson's quote in mind as we move through the next few slides. So 2020, January comes, and then we have February and March. And every week, every day was significant during the evolving COVID-19 phase. As the blindfolds came off, what did we see? The first stark reality that hit home in India was public health care. In terms of access, in terms of availability, and in terms of affordability. And also in terms of allied health services like laboratory services were not really in place. And now I go back to, Bhargavi, you don't have to change the slides, but if we go back and think about the tuberculosis public health campaign, and also for the communicable diseases, especially gastrointestinal infections and upper respiratory infections that happen in India. And we look at, did we build robust public health campaigns, public health messages, and the way to reach people on a very large, massive scale with previous epidemics that were going on in India? I would say yes and no. In some parts of the country, some states did exceptionally well to bring up to par, depending on the resources they had. But then some states just were not able to keep up. They just didn't have the wherewithal to even attempt at addressing tuberculosis, at addressing infections in children, gastrointestinal infections in children, related to poor hygiene, hygienic conditions. So these were already in place. And what did COVID-19 do? It just showed us wherever these cracks and crevices were already existing, COVID-19 made it worse, and beyond worse in some cases. And coupled with the poor public health care structure that we had in India, the K through 10 education is another area that could have, if 2009 onwards, if the focus was the emphasis and focus was put on certain things to get everybody literate. And I'm going to get a little bit more in detail later on, and then hopefully even during Q&A. What we noticed again in the education, especially elementary K through 10 education, is so crucial in being able to reach folks. So we noticed, rural versus urban. In rural areas, the schools and the supporting community, what resources did they have? And lack of resources played into it. And we had technology tools. Some of the schools, especially Jawahar Navodaya school system, JNVs, have laptops. And then you have other schools in rural areas that have no electricity, no good ventilation, and also no computers. And in some cases, if there were donations made to these schools and there were computers, there was no internet and there was no electricity. So we had this scenario play out. And most importantly, what is, again, topping the list among, in the education sector or in the domain, how it has played out in COVID-19 is that digital literacy versus illiteracy. United Nations, I believe back in 2000, between 2005 and 10, really brought it to focus that digital literacy is also one of the, one of the focus areas. They made this as one of the focus areas. And again, when I made my earlier comment that did we keep up with the international goals to be on par with other countries? And this is where digital illiteracy also came into place. One would really, and again, this is not taking a very, I guess, accusatory approach, but it's if we critically look at what did India do with having this India Inc. technology? It was on the cover, excuse me, it was on the cover of some of the major magazines and national newspapers that, India Inc. was touted to be the, I guess, panacea for all ills. And lo and behold, we noticed that, COVID-19 is another place, another situation where technology didn't really match up to the challenge that was that's been going on at this point. Next slide, Bhargavi. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I want to get you to get accustomed to this concept that came from social psychology. And this came, this concept, learned helplessness, is a very interesting concept. And understanding, understanding India for the last, I would say, my work started in 2011, but right after 2009, after I finished my postdoc, my mother wanted me to visit villages, and I've been noticing this phenomenon for the last, I guess, 30 years. So learned helplessness is a concept that was put forward by Martin Seligman in 1975. And this is to understand maladaptive behaviors in social and clinical, for a social and clinical perspective. And this also learned helplessness is a model that's used in positive psychology. This phenomenon is observed in both humans and animals when they've been conditioned to expect pain, suffering, or discomfort without a way to escape it. I'm using Cherry's definition of 2017, but Martin Seligman has written several books about it. When humans or animals begin to understand or believe that they have no control over what happens, they begin to think, feel, act as if they're helpless. And the next point is crucial, and I want all to take home this message. This is not an innate trait. No one is born believing that they have no control. It is a learned behavior. Hence, it's called learned helplessness. And it's conditioned through their experiences when an individual perceives that either they have no control over circumstances or that he has no control. And this particular, psychological, social state that one gets into, this is when there's a downward spiral that happens in the clinical and social, in social domains of a community, of an individual who lives in a community. And this is the model that's also used in explaining depression, clinical depression. Next slide, Bhargavi. So what we noticed learned helplessness play out became very evident as we read stories of migrant workers having to make way to their homes. And we noticed at individual level, family, group, community, village, it went all the way to the national level. And I intentionally started at the individual level and how it really, the focus has to be at the bottom. And we really have to focus on all the ground reality and the ground challenges that it doesn't matter whether it's India or United States, the ground reality really matters, how things change, how things show up and how things look at the top. And what we saw was, as the horrendous stories that we read, the WHO announced COVID-19 is a pandemic, in early January, first week of January. And between January and March, before the lockdown began, we almost had 60 days. But many migrant workers did not even get paid for the month, for the week, for the day that they had to leave. And as we all know, I'm not going to rehash some of the challenges and the way the lockdown was executed, or put in place. 4 hours, for a country of 1.3 billion people is, it just, I cannot even wrap my head around it. I can only imagine what folks, migrant workers went through. And we will talk a little bit more in the discussion section, in the Q&A, as we go through that, how certain families, individuals, communities who felt that they still had a sense of control and still felt that they had things that they were able to have in their control and be able to control their immediate environment, fared better than some of the other folks who didn't have any control. And what we saw at a massive level is this learned helplessness. And particularly this one child, I believe Leo posted this on LinkedIn, this 13-year-old girl who made her way all the way from Andhra Pradesh or Telangana back home, I believe Bihar, and just at the footstep of our village, just before entering the village, she passed away and she did not make it. And I can imagine this, what this girl might have gone through. And there's another, another area of learned helplessness that is going to play out for all of the folks who are witnessing this pandemic the way it is playing out in India. The ones who have the resources, the ones who have, technology at home, they have food at home, they have shelter, they have housing. Even for these folks, what they're going to experience for the next coming years is going to be something that we need to also start focusing on. Being a bystander, being able to, and witnessing all these horrendous atrocities are going to have an impact emotionally, psychologically, cognitively, and intellectually, and it is going to happen to every, to whoever is experiencing this. And I'm going to now, I gave you this model of learned helplessness. I'm going to go to the next slide, number 11, Bhargavi. And I'm going to give you a little quiz, or call it, if I were to ask you these questions. There's a peninsula on this planet that's about 1.26 million square miles, houses about 65,000 animal species, 12,000 flora and fauna, with the highest peak that supports rarest animals and plants. And I did not know this fact. Only country in the world, and if somebody has different, different information, correct me. I've been told that India is the only country that has lions and tigers in one, land. But anyway, I kind of cheated. I gave you away, by saying India. But let's look at this. So for more than 5,000 years history, we have this history on this patch of land where successfully, these communities have been living and thriving in villages, weaving the old with the new that still continues to make unique social fabric. It's characterized by global culture, weathering many waves of globalization for about 5,000 years. And this is the key part of the quiz. Ethnically, linguistically, gastronomically, religiously, and spiritually, this patch of land is most diverse, has almost about 70% of the population that's less than 40 years, and houses the largest cohort of children in the world, approximately 430 million children. And, Bhargavi, you can, let's stay on that slide. And if I were to just present this to you, and you would be amazed at the diversity of this patch of land. And Bhargavi, you want to guess which, patch? I mean, where is this patch of land? Anyway, so this is what I call the Fabergé. This is a Fabergé. This is India. And there is no country in the world that has 22 languages and more than 400 dialects in one piece of land. Imagine the immense, diversity that this land has nurtured over more than 5,000 years. I mean, this is just mind-boggling if you ask me. And then for the next 30 years, India is going to have the largest cohort of children in the world. So next slide, Bhargavi. So I gave you a psychological model, which is a learned helplessness. And now I'm going to bring you to the nature part of it, which is now we are in a VUCA world with an emerging fourth industrial revolution. Internet of Things, technology driving the next industrial revolution that we've been talking about for the last 3 to 5 years. And if we look at where, in this VUCA world, we've got a COVID-19. And what do we need to move forward? And here we need critical thinkers. We need critical thinkers, and the more we have, the better. With a population of 1.3 billion, we have all the more reasons to expect that India can have many, many critical thinkers. But there are a few impediments that are in the way. And those are the impediments that I've listed. And those are the two big ones are cognitive dissonance and this impoverished mindset. When we think, act, and feel with the cognitive dissonance and an impoverished mindset, we go back to that learned helplessness model. And the way I explained to you how animals and this has been done in experiments have been done in animals and humans to demonstrate learned helplessness. That's where that's going to take us. What we need is who can ride past and be able to evolve or ascend away from the cognitive dissonance, impoverished mindset, and also from emotional rigidity. Not being able to emotionally be flexible in understanding a situation, in understanding a problem, and generating solutions is going to play out. So next slide, Bhargavi. So here we have a Fabergé, a large populace experiencing learned helplessness during this COVID-19 with a cognitively dissonant mindset in a emotionally less agile governance. So when we have this scenario play out in COVID-19, how do we nurture next generation of, next slide, Bhargavi, is that how do we get the critical thinkers to usher utopian possibilities? And so here, we need critical thinkers to play a huge role, significant role in this social change ecosystem. And if you look at this diagram, this Deepa Iyer really put a fantastic diagram here. In order to achieve some of these utopian ideals, equity, inclusion, liberation, justice, solidarity, resilience, and interdependency. We need every community, every village, every taluka, every district. We need dream makers, we need thinkers, we need bridge builders, we need storytellers, we need caregivers, we need visionaries. We need to focus on nurturing this talent at every level. And this is where I see COVID-19 offering this possibility. Next one, next slide, please. So in order to achieve that, at every level, to bring this multidisciplinary, bring these diverse group of people together to, as we are in this VUCA world, and we have to move towards, navigate this fourth industrial revolution. What we really need to focus on first and foremost is this particular quote from Elie Wiesel is something that we need to really contemplate. The opposite of love is not hate. Its opposite is indifference. And again, I'm going to say it, the opposite of love is not hate. Its opposite is indifference. And I think that is the first step that we have to recognize, that we have to start from a place of love and love and not the indifference. And I think the indifference was something that played out at individual level, at family level, at community levels, at village level, and at taluka and district levels, as many large population of India is still has very low income levels and what they experienced. And I think, it's that indifference. How do we address indifference? How do we root out the indifference? Next slide. And here I bring you my representation or interpretation of how do we enhance, or how do we start thinking about that growth mindset, and how do we bring these different dots together. And when we say love, first and foremost, we have to have respect. We have to have awareness of all beings. And I think respect is something that it's sorely lacking in everything that has been happening in India and elsewhere too, even in United States. And I'm going to give you a quick example. When I began my community postings, we had to go to villages in Nimanj. I had a wonderful professor, and I still remember this one piece of advice tip that he gave us. He said, one was about academics, but anyway, this tip, he said, before you step into the village, the only thing I want you to remember is respect the people. And I think this is something that I have seen since in all my travels to India, Indian villages, I've seen that as we became more and more urban, the respect that we are, that we should have for villages where our food is grown, that respect has been dwindling. And I think that is one place I see, is a seed for growth, with respect. And if we start with respect, then we garner love, which brings out less indifference and less apathy. And then we start to appreciate diversity. And the more we appreciate diversity, the more connected we feel. And then we've got next generation of stewards of the planet. And solidarity is what is going to drive us to the next level of growth. Next slide. Yeah. So I have 3 slides on how do we do this upstream solution, upstream lab. The previous slide, Bhargavi. Yeah, and the next one, please. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I thought I missed a slide. And so how and what can prepare us for year 2021? Dr. Ryan at WHO, said this, and I've been reflecting on this. He said this sometime in April. One of the press reporters from Africa asked a question, and he said, in all public health work, in all developmental work, what is the first thing that matters? And Dr. Ryan said, governance, governance, governance. And I added another layer to it. It is infuse that with emotional agility. And I'm going to give you an example of Kerala here. And this is a great example of listen, validate, empathize, reflect, and work from a place of Zen, and intentional with a proactive style. And this is what Kerala did. when WHO announced there was a pandemic in January, the first thing Shailaja, the health minister, did was they looked at all of the manuals of WHO that were published for COVID-19, and they started working on it quietly, and they started putting different models in place and different modules for them to work. And they worked from a place of listening, validating, and empathizing what folks of Kerala were going through, in how they addressed schools, food and nursing care and elderly care, and also public spaces. And this is something, I'm not going to get into detail, but Kerala was a great example of how they started this and how they are faring in this whole COVID-19. Next slide. So, and in the earlier part of my musings, I said that two things we need to focus on is public health models, and also K through 10 education. Public health model of care and delivery. This is where, if we look at some of the royalty, I particularly take Maharaja of Mysore as an example, because one of the first public health initiatives that happened in the country were by the Maharaja of Mysore. Just look at the magnificent care hospital that's in Mysore. Just look at the physical structure. It is regal almost. And there's a lot of open space, and there is a huge garden in the front, and there are different sections. And similar model was seen at the district level. If you look at the district hospitals, and now they're in dilapidated situation, they've been, most of them are in dilapidated conditions right now. And a lot of private hospitals have come up. If you looked at in the 70s and 80s, if you look at the public hospitals, they were very thoughtful. They did put some thought into it, and they had an empathic understanding. So folks who were having infectious diseases, there was a separate unit, a separate building, and surgery was in a separate building of this entire campus. And even within the smaller district and taluk level hospitals, there was thought put into place. And now you look at the primary healthcare center in a village, it looks like a dump site where the biological waste gets dumped. That's how it looks in many places. Some of them are okay, some of them are really good, but then most of them, when they have a budget of 1 lakh rupees per year, you get what you get. And what I say in the upstream, solution is that particular knowledge that we had, the buildings may not exist, but let's take some of that institutional knowledge and move forward. Some of the successful public health messages, public health reach models that worked for vaccinations and tuberculosis is something that we need to fall back on as we move forward, because we will be in a VUCA world. We will be in another pandemic soon. Kerala learned from its stress test, especially Nipah. And that's another place that we can learn a lot from. And I really like to focus on the ASHA workers and health aides, both male and female health aides. They're a tremendous source of inspiration, and I think if I have to put my $1 million, I would put them on ASHA workers, because they are going to be really the movers and shakers in this as we move to 2021. Next slide, Bhargavi. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time. So in terms of the school, we really need to focus on building and strengthening, not building, supporting and strengthening existing schools in villages and small towns, because there are a lot of open spaces. They have large yards. Kids should be in cooperative play. Kids should be playing in teams, and kids should be involved in, engaged in a lot of play, at least for the first 12 years of life, because that's where the creativity that they nurture during those developmental years is really going to help them to be critically, good at, will be able to think better critically and also come up with better solutions. One of two things that are sorely lacking in schools at this point is, it's not the technology, it's the libraries. Kids should be reading lots. Kids should be reading almost every day, more than trying to bring all kinds of gadgets and paraphernalia into schools. What we really need to do is that every school should be equipped with a library. And there are a few things that, very simple nudges that can actually change the way we think about schools. For in terms of, we should have enough, technology should come in to support us here, that, in terms of when the schools open, when the colleges open, when they close, when they have exams, and, do the buses come on time to, to these villages? These are all the things that we don't need another 10 years. These are things that can be solved in 6 months using technology. And this is where we need to focus on first fixing some of these small things. These small nudges can have a huge impact. Next slide. And then we have to look at, as I earlier mentioned, about having leaders at a very local level where they bring in multidisciplinary perspectives. Like, you've got a village where a nurse can bring in some wisdom. You've got a teacher, you've got a farmer, you've got a pharmacist, you've got a bus driver. So all these people, we need to bring them together to solve solutions. And there are many, I have come across many emotionally agile leaders in the village settings. We need to tap into that resource. And we need leaders who are quiet, contemplative, who have a creative style. And I have a few examples that I can share later on. And we really need leaders who bring communities together. The next slide. So we can go back to any of the slides if anybody needs to look at it, and these will be available for later. I want to leave you with 2 slides here. One is this wonderful poet of 14th century, Amir Khusro, a Muslim who wrote in Persian, and his ancestry was Turkish, but he counted himself luckiest man alive to have been born in India and to have India as his motherland. And there is 2 lines that really struck a chord in me, because they treat him as their own, play an excellent host and win his heart, and show him how to smile like a flower. What I have seen, even in the face of extreme adversity, that every village face that I've seen, they have this beautiful smile like a flower. And that is what we need to, we need to tap into. That is what is going to bring us the hope. And that's what is going to drive us to do better than what we have done. And here I have, so I did the 20 slides and the 21st slide with how do we look forward to, and I think we need to start with the reflection, and we can play the poem.
I think it's got to do with permissions, Manju, that we need to permit by. That's going to take a while.
Okay.
Your drive, we need access to your drive. So
I did, well, okay. We can move forward, and I'm done. Thank you all for your patience, for your time, and thank you, Bhargavi and Leo.
Okay, so I'm going to take over from here because Bhargavi's computer is playing up today. She's going to
Sure.
reboot and come back.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so I'm trying to. Sorry, we've had a lot of technological issues in the IT capital of India. Least of which we did not expect is that we wouldn't have 3 different Wi-Fi's playing up on us. But it happened today. So anyway, but we are okay. We're trying to manage. So anyway, I think from your talk, what I gathered is that it's a very, very methodical and clinical analysis of how governance should work to build a public health system which is resilient and resolute, and how far away from that India is. And this would also probably be a situation for much of the world. It is not necessarily an index of how advanced you are in terms of financial and technological prowess, but how advanced you are in terms of how you have built your public health systems, the basic things, right? Education and so on. And you brought it out extremely well, and I thank you for that. So I have questions coming, but I wanted to ask you, in terms of symbolism, our Prime Minister has rightly reached out to the soldiers today, and he has gone and met with them, especially the soldiers who were brutally attacked on the border. Conflict, which we can debate is necessary or unnecessary, that's a secondary issue. But the Prime Minister, as a symbolic gesture, has gone and met them today.
Yeah.
The same man did not step out of Delhi to meet migrant workers. Mm-hmm. So, from a psychological perspective, how does this play out for the entire country? I mean, what is the message from this type of? I mean, he obviously did not go and meet the victims of the carnage in Program in Delhi, for instance. So we know why that happened. Yeah. But what would prevent a prime minister to meet migrants, walking, children? They're also soldiers.
Yeah.
They may not be on the front lines, but everybody is soldiering to build this country. You are, I am, everyone is. Yes. So how does this play out psychologically in the psychology of a country when this happens from the top man?
That's a great question, Leo. And I'm going to, earlier I just alluded to that in the interest of time. Number one is the ethos. The ethos of the nation is in a way, it's twisted. That is the cognitive dissonance I'm talking about. That the more we put folks, the entire population in this cognitive dissonant mode where the thinking and the acting are not aligned, okay? And what is a message that gives to the larger public, the haves and the have-nots, right? So it does create a uneasiness, and depending on different individuals' disease vulnerability for psychiatric disorders, some can experience anxiety, some can experience, mood disorder, and, in some cases it can lead to a thought disorder, a repeated cognitive dissonance that we have been noticing, in the last few years. I would say, where, we see that a lot of food. You're okay? Can you hear me?
Somebody's microphone is on. Can you please mute it?
Okay.
I think it is Ishita.
Yeah. So it does do a tremendous psychological number on people who are witnessing it. And then, of course, we cannot even, fathom what the folks who are going through, who are walking in this heat with no food, water, hundreds of miles. And then what I ask a question is, how can, if we are not able to look ourselves in the mirror, not every day we look great, but we should be able to look ourselves in the mirror. And that's why we need this reflection, because when reflection is not easy, it's uneasy, and it does stir up certain emotions, but that's also a place where solutions come to surface. And if we are not able to look at ourselves as a leader, then we have lost an opportunity to come up with a solution. And the more we avoid, the avoidant behavior is not going to make one an effective leader. This should have been built, and that's where I see local leaders. Some of the folks that I have met in villages, they are tremendously resourceful, and the way they connect with the people and the way they bring them together at at a 1 hour notice. And to me, that's where the potential is. And that's what our, folks have to start recognizing as who is a true leader. And, separate the hubris from the grain.
Thank you. There's a question from, I would request anyone who has questions to type it in if you can through the chat box. I'm also looking at Facebook. There are some questions coming there because people are also watching on Facebook.
Yeah, and Leo, one of the things that I didn't touch upon is because, it's now that train has left a long time ago. For the last 30 years, the national budget for healthcare, and particularly for preventative care, has never budged past 1.2%. Okay? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So don't expect COVID-19 to magically disappear, or a magic bullet, just given once is going to vanish or take away the COVID-19.
So what do you then say about the announcement yesterday by ICMR that India will have its vaccine by the time Mr. Narendra Modi walks into the Red Fort on 15th of August? So what do we make of such kind of commitments? It's a national commitment to have a vaccine. So no other nation in the world has made that commitment, but we have. Yeah. Yeah. So how does this play out? I mean, this type of psychological posturing, if I may call it that.
Yeah, that's fantastic news, if you ask me. And I really applaud if they can actually have something by August 15th. I know Dr. Anthony Fauci will be very happy to really read the results of the paper. That said, this is where I go back to critical thinkers. What I noticed, with WhatsApp messages and WhatsApp University that has been putting out for the last 3 months, someone that I know, a good physician, they're not able to separate out, you even use their high school biology when it comes to this COVID-19 is an mRNA, virus. They suspended all critical thinking. So what I would do is that yesterday's announcement, I would like, a little more transparency, and if they can share, but I want folks to be educated. We have now access to a lot of information, via internet, thanks to Google, that provides a lot of, journal articles and lots of information. Start looking at, use your high school biology. If you're not a science graduate, how does it work? And, is it possible to have a vaccine ready for the masses by August 15th? If it is, then it's good. And this is where critical thinking really comes into play to understand, what is, how is it going to be manufactured on a large scale? How is it going to be delivered? Who is going to get it in the first phase? These are all the questions that I'm more interested in than making an announcement on August 15th, because August 15th will come and go, and the announcement will come and go. And if we don't have something in place, say for instance, for the next 18 months or 2 years, then that announcement is just an announcement. That said, let's look at one of the examples from before. For instance, how we have addressed, tuberculosis, and how every state has not been on par in trying to address both, the medication delivery and food for these tuberculosis patients, and early detection and diagnosis. They've not happened uniformly. I mean, we have not been able to reach people at the lowest level to make sure that everybody has the same information about tuberculosis. So this is a first public health lesson that folks have gotten in the last 40 years, that we have to wash hands. The entire country is on the same page about we have to wash hands and we have to wear a mask, and that the droplets are the ones that are actually are causing this respiratory distress. So
yeah, I mean, I get that. It's many lost opportunities, but we are here now.
yeah.
But going back to one of your slides, there was this whole thing about somebody from the WHO, I can't recall the name, saying governance, governance, governance.
Dr. Ryan.
Dr. Ryan, yes. Governance, governance, and governance, right? Just yesterday, the Department of Health of Karnataka finally put out a notice, a circular in which it said, asymptomatic patients, or even those who are mildly symptomatic, if they are below 50, can stay at home, and then et cetera, they will be quarantined, et cetera, in particular ways. Now, from a public health perspective, the pitch that was made at the very instance of the government taking action finally, I would say. I mean, the government should have taken action in January, but it delayed it for more than a month for various reasons. We'll not get into that. But this is a big lesson for the future, right?
Yeah.
And I think learning from that lesson, we went into lockdown for a very, very harsh period of 75 days, 80 days. And now when we open our pages, it's very depressing. We are hearing about a man who knocked on 19 hospital doors. None of them opened for him in Bangalore, and he dies. Yeah. We hear of a man who went to Victoria Hospital and there were no beds, so he dies outside Victoria Hospital. And I can go on. We have seen how we dispose the bodies of the dead. It's not like the dead are infecting us, the living ones are. So if logically speaking, we should be tossing all of us who are infected into pits, you see?
Yes,
now,
exactly.
We're a country which is largely driven by a message from a powerful person, currently at least. So how does governance work, and what quality of governance is it that will transform this terrible situation in which we can, and the quality of governance in which we can learn particular lessons? And this won't be the last pandemic for us.
Yes.
Or
for the rest of the world.
Yeah, or for the rest of the frequency of pandemics has only increased in the last 20 years. So moving forward, how do we get this whole question of governance organized? And what quality of governance or what level of governance are we speaking?
That's a great question, Leo. For instance, looking at, it's a hindsight. And one thing that I'm going to say is that when we knew in January and before March, one thing that could have been, minimized to some degree was, focus on the airports, because, it mostly started with, international travel. So international travelers coming in, you quarantine, or you start focusing on all the services that feed into the, airports, international airports. And if you had started with that, we would have bought more time with the communities, with the other folks, in the rest of the cities and states where these international airports are. That said, how do we move forward? I would say we have ASHA workers for every 1,000 folks. And I still know, I mean, I can only speak for Karnataka state, that I'll give you an example of T. Narsipura. Folks still, I mean, ASHA workers are, I cannot tell you how wonderful they are. They know the names of almost all 1,000 people who lives in a family. They know everybody. But guess what they don't have? They don't have a way to capture the data and have the data available for them on a tablet, on a phone that they can use and look at and report that to the nodal officer, and who's probably having some more software or access to surveillance systems. One of the things we can start with at the top level is build a technologically supported surveillance system. Have your entire state on the technology platform with that, and then bring in ASHA workers, respect them, use their wisdom, and get the information for those 1,000 folks. And then ASHA workers are also good at being a glue to their communities, and they talk to the other villages, and this is where we need to start focusing on building that groundwork. And the next thing we need to do is we need to make sure that the doctor and the nurses who are in a primary healthcare unit or a sub-center, they actually are there every day, and they're also trained in how to understand simple surveillance. I mean, they've already had training in medical school for epidemiology and surveillance, and I hope they can still refresh their memories and actually start working on that, and refresh their skills and start using that skill to connect with the ASHA workers. I mean, this is where I think we need to start. Start at the ground level, and then you bring in the leaders from the community, the villages, to also inform them. They're quick learners. They may not have gadgets, but I tell you what I've seen is they learn fast.
Here's a trick question from Facebook. How do you compare learned helplessness with concepts of karma and fate?
Karma and fate. I don't know much about karma and fate, but I can tell you that in the learned helplessness in the reformulated model, one of the things that Seligman said is that the degree of control or lack of control you have in the current situation predicts future control of a situation of a different one. So basically, how the sense of control, the degree of control you feel in a current situation can really predict how you are going to look at the next situation. So if you asked Seligman, he's going to say that, look, it's in the way we think and act and feel. And why do we chant prayers? Why do we chant Vedic hymns? They're all supposed to infuse positive thoughts, right? So if we believe in that, then the way we think, act, and feel, and the kind of control we have determines the future situation. And that is, I think, the way we can understand fate or karma. To large extent, it's the degree of control. It's the way we think, act, and feel. I don't think I
think no, it does. In fact, Tani says that she thanks you for articulating that many of us here would be bystanders for the next few years, witnessing how it would all play out and silently suffer. Now, I want to add here, and of course we need to tide over it together, but should we approach the future with a state of powerlessness? I mean, the state is doing everything to disempower us.
Yes.
Powerful is a term that came from prison. It didn't come from the parliament.
Yeah. that is a tough one, and I'm not sure whether I have the answer, because this is where, when nonprofits have done a tremendous amount of, they've rolled up their muscles, their sleeves, and they've been, on the ground, seeing, experiencing day in and out what is happening to their reality around them, right? And to at one level, they've had extreme degree of understanding, and that brings that wisdom and knowledge, which brings a control. Okay, you feel you can understand this better. There's a sense of control. But then every other force around is disempowering you, is stripping away each layer of control that you have. And to me, that is really worrisome. And hence I talked about the learned helplessness, and this learned helplessness has been going on for quite some time. It didn't start out in 2010. It started out a little earlier than that. And I notice the young folks, especially in their 20s and 30s, they are speaking out on social media sites. When they see something that's not right, they're speaking out. The more they speak out, the uneasiness, I think, within themselves individually, what they experience is going to go down. But collectively, if you come together, that's another way to help, to gain more control. One thing I'll tell you, a selfish individual always wins in a one-on-one situation. But when you have an altruistic group, and this is again by E.O. Wilson's work on ants, when you have an altruistic group, it always trumps selfish individuals. So what we need to bring, and that's why I bring in that what we really need is prophylactically, everybody, they're talking about vitamin D3, talking about chloroquine and a few others. What we need to infuse into the communities, whether the state, whether the governance, gives it to you or not, we have plenty of hope, we have plenty of love, respect, and that's what we need to, kindness, compassion, that's what we need to fortify ourselves with, to make the altruistic groups stronger. And the altruistic groups are the ones which are going to help in countering the power.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a webinar we had a few days ago, and this was about the Gaia, and we had scientists from Brazil, Antonio and Stephen Harding from England, essentially arguing that we have got so trapped psychologically in this Darwinian understanding of life,
Yeah.
that we believe that it is always the survival of the fittest, and capitalist society organized itself around it. And you live in the capital of capitalism.
Yeah.
And you
Mother of
probably
all capitalisms.
so, and their argument was that, of course, we have brought the world to a standstill because of how that kind of human nature plays out. But truly speaking, evolutionarily, Darwin just explained it in a particular way, but a real explanation was of cooperation and mutual dependence and interdependence. And recent theories, ecological as well as otherwise, have brought to the fore how it is important to rethink our entire understanding of how life evolved and stabilized on this planet. Now, with that, I will stop my questions because I don't see any more questions coming. So your final thoughts, and then Bhargavi takes over, because I can see that she has got her computer back now.
Oh, okay, wonderful. No, you hit it right on the nail, Leo, when you said cooperative. And again, this is where I go back and, because of, in the interest of time, what I see is that, when I see children in the villages, we have set this scale that, when we look at anthropomorphic anthropomorphic data on their height and weight, we compare it to certain populations which are not even on the same piece of land as India. So we compare them. We need to have our own understanding of our, the diverse group that India has. And there are a lot of resilience factors in these children, in these communities, in these diverse indigenous groups that we have. Both, the resilience factors for diseases as well as psychological factors. We have never tapped into those factors or understanding of them. We have always looked at the Western model. And I think this is where, when I said this Fabergé, I'm really, there's a nugget of information, like how did for 5,000 years, with so much globalization happening, they continued to build and rebuild and rebuild and rebuild. How did they come to this place? So there is something that is in the DNA. And to me, that Amir Khusraw's poem really brings home that is a resilience that India has, and that we have forgotten, and that folks have forgotten, in this, and it's all driven by indifference, absence of love. And I think that's where, if we make that shift, and I think, the thinking is going to follow in a very different way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Manju. That was a fantastic talk, and I'm really sorry that my laptop just froze and I could not take over soon after your presentation. But I think we have a lot of takeaways from here. I particularly kind of resonate with the learned helplessness that you spoke about, and the godlike technology that is being dumped on us for practically everything. I think it's a really thought-provoking talk for us to kind of think about over the weekend. So thanks again, and thanks everyone who joined us. So thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this blessed opportunity to be with you all. And really, this is just a snapshot of, how we can think differently. And I'll be happy to, talk to anyone on the email or, and you all stay safe and be well, and be the inspiration for me and for so many others. And also my love to all the folks that you serve, and all the communities that you interact with.
Thank you. Yeah, so we'll be back again next Friday at 5 o'clock, and that will be the final talk of this series. And thanks for making this series exciting.
Thank you.